I do think it's past time to secure the border. And that's what H.R. 2 reflects. Remember, we passed that bill more than 8-9 months ago now, and it's been sitting on the desk. H.R. 2 had very important elements. Restore Remain in Mexico policy, end catch and release, reform the asylum program, the broken parole process, rebuild the wall.
Unfortunately, our government doesn't care how many refugees end up in America. Could you have imagined a couple of years ago that this would be happening in our country? It's very scary and it needs to be addressed. House Speaker Mike Johnson called for wholesale changes in border policy as he huddled with President Joe Biden and congressional leaders in talks at the White House over billions the president wants for Ukraine and Israel.
With regard to Ukraine, we have requested publicly, privately, in every forum, answers to the critical questions. What is the end game and the strategy in Ukraine? How will we have accountability for the funds? We need to know that Ukraine would not be another Afghanistan. And you see a lot of the American people scratching their heads, having real questions about why that would continue without these appropriate answers. So I'm going to push for those. But before we even talk about Ukraine, I'm going to tell the president, what I'm telling all of you, and we've told the American people, border, border, border. We have to take care of our own house. We have to secure our own border before we talk about doing anything else. And that's the message I've had since day one. It's the message we'll continue to have. And I think that's the message the American people want us to deliver. I told that to the president myself on the telephone. We had a 30-minute phone call, I think Thursday of last week.
Meeting at the White House for his second time as Speaker, Johnson described a national security and humanitarian catastrophe at the border, something he said he articulated to the president. There's concern about safety, security, and sovereignty of Ukraine, but the American people have those same concerns about our own domestic sovereignty and our safety and our security, he said following the conclusion of a meeting between the president and the Big Four congressional leaders. He called for a return to the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy and the end of catch and release. We're not insistent on a particular name of a piece of legislation, but we are insistent that the elements have to be real. The House is ready to act, but the legislation has to solve the problem, he said.
Thank you all for being here. We had a productive meeting, I think, House and Senate leaders. The president was very forthright. I told the president what I have been saying for many months, and that is that we must have change at the border, substantive policy change. We understand that there's concern about the safety, security, sovereignty of Ukraine, but the American people have those same concerns about our own domestic sovereignty and our safety and our security. But we must insist that the border be the top priority. I think we have some consensus around that table. Everyone understands the urgency of that, and we're going to continue to press for it.
I am more optimistic than ever before that we'd come to an agreement. I put the chances a little bit greater than half now. And that's the first time I can say that.
His comments came on a day the House voted to condemn Biden on the border crisis. Biden met with the leaders about his stalled $106 billion supplemental funding request. It includes funds for Ukraine, which have been stalled since the near year, as well as funds to Israel, humanitarian aid for the Palestinians, and border funding.
Yeah, the big question this week, Diane, has been why did the president bring congressional leaders down to the White House to talk about Ukraine when the big sticking point on Ukraine funding is, of course, the border negotiations that Jay O'Brien was just talking about there. I was getting asked whether the president was giving lawmakers something new yesterday, something urgent that could change the calculation for any Republicans, make them drop their demands for major border policy changes in exchange for their support for more Ukraine funding. Now, these are Republicans yesterday who came to the White House, many who have said they support more aid for Ukraine, but it has to come with those big border policy changes. The White House yesterday said that meeting was all about Ukraine. That was the president's focus. Afterwards, though, lawmakers said border was certainly a big topic of conversation. And after, the White House said the president is encouraged by the progress in negotiations. He is still really pushing lawmakers to move forward on that Ukraine funding. They say he wants to get it done very swiftly.
There are deep divides on how to address the border crisis, and a number of Republicans have raised concerns about further U.S.-Ukraine aid, calling for more oversight and urging against any blank check. Johnson, who holds a razor-thin margin in the House, spoke in generalities about Ukraine. We understand the necessity about Ukraine funding, and we want to say that the status quo is unacceptable. We need the Commander-in-Chief of this country, the President of the United States, to show strength on the world stage, not weakness. We cannot continue with the current status quo. We understand the importance of what's been needed, said Johnson.
Well, if the president thought it was such an urgent matter, he could have been dealing with this for the last 6 weeks. We've literally not had any movement from the other side. And this is a deep concern to me, as it is to all of you. I want you to know that the day after I was handed the gavel, I went to the Situation Room and sat down with Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor. I've spoken to the Secretary of Defense about this, the Secretary of State. We have made the position very clear that we needed further clarity. Part of the problem with the Ukraine funding, and the reason so many of the American people are concerned about it, is that there's been no real clarity on what the strategy is, what the end game is, how we'll have proper oversight over the dollars that have already been spent or the money that's being requested now. I do not think it is an unreasonable thing to ask for those things. So I've done it multiple times, in the SCIF, in the Situation Room, privately, publicly, most recently late last week at the Congressional Auditorium in front of all of our peers.
Then he appeared to call for greater accountability for U.S. aid. There are certain things that are needed to ensure that we need the questions answered about the strategy, about the end game, and about the accountability of the precious treasure in America, he said. We understand that all these things are important, but we must insist, that the border be the top priority.
But first I want to tell you that we have a great cross-section of the House. We have 64 House Republicans that have joined us here in Eagle Pass. They represent 26 states, 1 U.S. territory. You have everybody from California to Maryland, from Michigan to Florida. We represent over half the U.S. states because every state in America is now a border state, and we've seen that on vivid display today. Today we were able to meet with local residents, with sheriffs, with the Texas DPS. We also toured the CBP processing facility here in Eagle Pass, and it's been an eye-opener. One thing is absolutely clear. America is at a breaking point with record levels of illegal immigration, and today we got a first-hand look at the damage and the chaos the border catastrophe is causing in all of our communities.
With Johnson stopping short of bashing the proposal, Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, who spoke separately along with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, sounded an optimistic tone. There's a large amount of agreement around the table that we must do Ukraine and we must do border, Schumer said. I am more optimistic than ever before that we can come to an agreement. He said the chances were greater than half, and that's the first time I can say that.
It was a very good meeting and a very positive meeting. There was a large amount of agreement around the table that we must do Ukraine and we must do border. There was tremendous focus on Ukraine and an understanding that if we don't come to Ukraine's aid, that the consequences for America around the globe would be nothing short of devastating.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was at the White House but didn't address the media. The White House said the meeting was to discuss the critical importance of his national security supplemental request.
We still oppose a general ceasefire, yes. For the same reason that we have in the past. We don't believe a ceasefire is going to be to the benefit of anybody but Hamas. We do support humanitarian pauses, as I said, to try to get hostages out and more aid in, but we don't support a ceasefire at this time. I think it's important to remember that there was a ceasefire in place on the 6th of October, and Hamas, Mr. Sinwar chose to break that ceasefire. He's the one that chose this war. There was a ceasefire, which we obviously were in support of, and Hamas chose to break it.
Democrats are ready to help Johnson's cause and oppose Biden. Although he faces significant pressure from President Donald Trump and conservatives not to back the deal, Democrats are now offering to help him keep his speakership should he face a motion to vacate over his passing of the immigration bill. Our job is not to save Johnson, but I think it would be a mighty pity if he did the right thing for us not to support him. Up to this point, he's been a fairly honest broker, House Homeland Security Committee Benny Thompson, DMS, said.
Jake, good to be with you. Sorry it's taken so long to come on with you since I became Speaker. Listen, this is a catastrophe down here. And what the White House is proposing is more money to process and allow more illegals into the country. We need to do the opposite of that. And this is, you don't need to take my word for it. Listen to the Deputy Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol who was with us last night, and he told us in his own words, he said, "It's as if I'm at an open fire hydrant. I don't need more buckets to dump the water." He said, "I need to turn the flow off." That's why we're here today, Jake. We had 64 House Republicans here representing 26 states and 1 U.S. territory, everybody from California to Maryland, Michigan to Florida, because every state in America is a border state right now. This catastrophe can come to an end if the Biden administration will do its job, and they've refused to do it. They're doing the opposite.
Representative Adam Smith, DWA, said, "People really underestimate the degree to which people really didn't like Kevin McCarthy. The argument I've made to Mike is, you're going to make an enormous amount of progress on the border however this comes out, and you've still got your political issue because you think there's more that needs to be done. He's got to decide if he's going to do what's right, or he's going to do what's politically expedient to just keep himself there for another, I don't know how long," Rep. Vicente Gonzalez, DTX, said.
I think President Biden has been pretty clear that he's willing to work with anybody, particularly towards the best interest of the American people. There's some really serious, important business that's coming up in the next few weeks, whether it's securing the funding for Ukraine, for Israel, securing the funding necessary to keep the government open. There's some serious business that's obviously been delayed by the speaker fight. But I think the president and I think Democrats have been pretty clear. They're willing to work with who Republicans put forward. The real question is, are Republicans ready to honor the commitments that they've already made and also to approach those types of relationships and conversations in good faith?
Breitbart News has documented how the border deal would only reward illegal immigration and encourage more foreign graduates to take jobs from American graduates. An agreed border deal would 1. Increase green cards by 50,000 a year. 2. Work permits for adult children of H-1B holders. 3. Immediate work permits to every illegal alien released from custody. 4. Taxpayer-funded lawyers to certain UACs and mentally incompetent aliens. 5. Expulsion authority for a limited number of days, only if encounters exceed 5K day over a 7-day period. 6. Restricts parole for those who enter without authorization between ports of entry. Johnson, instead of backing the deal, has urged President Joe Biden to use his executive authority to stem the border crisis. He said that returning to many of Trump's border control policies could combat the migration crisis. On his first day in office, President Biden came in and issued executive orders that began this chaos, Johnson said in early January.
And
Which
that's what we're
policy
trying.
choices do you think need
Well,
to be changed?
it's actually pretty simple. I mean, the president has the existing authority under federal law to stem the flow here. I mean, if you reinstituted the Remain in Mexico policy, for example, it was estimated by the people who are in charge here that would stem the flow by maybe 70%. I mean, that's a simple measure, an executive order that the White House could undertake. On his first day in office, President Biden came in and issued executive orders that began this chaos. Remain in Mexico is one of them. The catch and release program has created part of this problem. You could end catch and release. That's what President Trump did that helped stem the flow.
But you need the logistical and financial support to be able to do that. You need the judges. You need to be able to process people. We talked to federal agents about just that challenge.
Yeah, well,
And that Congress has the purse strings to give them the money to do that.
That's true, but I'll quote to you the Deputy Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol.
This includes the Remain in Mexico policy, which would require migrants seeking asylum to wait in Mexico for their court dates. Speaker Mike Johnson insists his Republican conference is unified, even though a vote to approve a stopgap funding bill to avert a government shutdown sharply divided them. The House passed a continuing resolution, or CR, on Thursday to fund the government. But 106 Republicans voted against the measure in a show of revolt. "We're all unified," Johnson insisted about his GOP conference in an exclusive interview with DailyMail.com at the Snowy March for Life rally in Washington, D.C. After the divided CR vote, "People are frustrated that the funding of the government, the appropriations process, has drug out so long," he explained. "I'm more frustrated than anyone," he told DailyMail.com. "But we have to allow the time for that process to play out." The CR set spending at 2023 levels established under Speaker Nancy Pelosi until March 1st for 4 agencies and March 8 for 8 others. It's the third CR Congress has passed, as it once again kicks the can down the road on funding the government, in fiscal year 2024.
Yeah, Laura, no one is strong-arming me. I told the president, I looked right across the table from him in the cabinet officials' room, and I said, Mr. President, you have the authority right now to end this catastrophe. It's your actions that created it. In fact, Mr. President, I told him in the meeting today, we've documented 64 instances of you taking executive actions in your agencies that created this catastrophe. Mr. President, it's on you to unwind it. We don't need new laws. You could do it right now. I've cited to him, read him the legal authority on the phone on Thursday of last week that he could take. And you know what he said in the meeting, Laura? He said, we're ready to do big things on the border. Well, hallelujah, Mr. President. President Biden, do your job. Fix the catastrophe that you've created. It's an unspeakable humanitarian catastrophe, a national security catastrophe. 302,000 people came over the border in December alone.
But they know this. Right, but they know this, Mr. Speaker.
Johnson still holds out hope that the extra few weeks will allow Congress to come together and negotiate 12 separate bills to fund each agency of government. He insists the extra time will allow Republicans to fight for conservative policy riders to be attached to those bills. The CR ultimately passed 374-108 on Thursday afternoon, with 109 Republicans voting for it and 106 against it. But Johnson faced revolt from even his closest allies on the deal. House GOP Conference Chair Elise Stefanik, Johnson's number 3, voted against the bill. So did 9 of Johnson's committee chairs. Stefanik, RNY, told DailyMail.com in a statement that she had concerns about the CR because it did not contain border security measures. My northern border district has seen an astonishing 550% increase in apprehensions last year across the Swanton sector, which is why I have concerns about this week's continuing resolution, she stated. I know the Speaker is working tirelessly to secure the border in the next funding package, the GOP leader continued.
House Republicans will continue to stand unequivocally with Israel. House Republicans passed a robust aid package under Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership, and yet Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer continue to fail to deliver support to our most precious ally. This week, House Republicans will welcome hundreds of thousands of our constituents proudly participating in the March for Life. The most important and meaningful title I have ever had in my life is Mom. We will continue to fight every day to ensure every baby has the sacred opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unfortunately, life is under constant attack by radical far-left Democrats.
Other notable no votes included House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, Budget Chair Jody Arrington, Chair of China Select Committee Mike Gallagher, Homeland Security Chair Mark Green, and a handful of other senior Republicans. Some were frustrated, like Stefanik, that the Speaker did not attach border security to the stopgap funding bill. Others just don't approve of governing by CR at all. The path for the House and Senate to conference on 12 separate appropriations bills within the next 2 months seems murky. Speaker Johnson added to DailyMail.com that Republicans will have to fight for our policies within those appropriations bills. The CR allows us, keeping the government open allows us the opportunity to do that. So we're moving forward. He struck an optimistic tone about what's ahead for the Republicans heading into the 2024 election in November.
Listen, I think when we're voting for president, it can't be about personalities. It's got to be about policies and principles. And if you want liberty, opportunity, and security for more people in the country, you contrast the two policies and the principles of Trump and Biden. It's not even close. Under President Trump, we had a thriving economy. We didn't have all these skirmishes around the world. We had relative peace because he projected peace through strength. We have exactly the opposite of all those things in President Biden. So I think you set aside those things and you look at what's best for your family. You look at what is best for your security, your safety, the economy, your pocketbook, all of these things. We have to make radical changes because the American people are hurting. Hardworking families are struggling. We can't handle inflation. We can't handle these things. And these are the results of the policies of the Biden White House. And I think that's clear to most people.
We got big things ahead of big agenda ahead. We're going to keep this team together and govern, and I think we're going to expand the majority, he predicted. I think we're going to win back the Senate for the Republican Party. I think we're going to win the White House as well. We'll have a lot bigger and better celebration next January.
Yeah, I mean, are you worried that one of these guys is going to make a move on you?
No, I'm not worried about that at all. I just met with all those guys. They're close friends of mine, and we agree on the principles. Look, I am a lifelong hardcore conservative. I want to get as many policy wins as we can. I want to advance the ball as far as we can. But the reality is we have a small majority. So in a situation like that, you're not going to get everything you want. You get what you can get. And we've been trying to negotiate to make that happen, and we're going to continue. And we're going to keep the team together. It's just another day at the office.
Right-wing Freedom Caucus hardliners had tried to force Speaker Mike Johnson to attach H.R. 2, Republicans' hardline border bill, to the deal, which would have thrown the government into a shutdown. Freedom Caucus Chair Bob Good R-Vey said he is furious with the Speaker for passing a CR with no border provisions and threatened to tank other Republican-led bills in the future. The hardliners even suggested they would rather plunge the government into shutdown in order to demand border security provisions. If Democrats want to shut down the border, then it's on them to shut down the government, Representative Eric Burleson Armo told reporters. It is Groundhog Day in the House chamber, all the time, every day, yet again, spending money we don't have, lamented Chip Roy in a bid to urge his colleagues to vote no on the CR. We know that Budget Act of 1974 calls for the 12 appropriation bills to be delivered by the House of Representatives by June 30th, and everybody just ignores that like it's a recommendation. Representative Matt Rosendale, Armont, told reporters. It's the law, and I am disgusted that yet we continue to ignore the process. Johnson resisted, instead relying on Democratic votes to make up for GOP defectors as a snowstorm barreled toward D.C., and lawmakers were gunning to get out of town. The bill passed the House under suspension, meaning it required a 2/3 majority to pass, but did not need to advance in a rule vote that typically only passes with the votes of the majority. Don't forget to write your opinion on this situation in the comments and watch our other news videos.